Professor Rajan, uh, we are about to kind of get into the domestic economic scenario in India. But before that, a question that's engaged minds of economists, especially in the last 6 months or so. It's about the possible headwinds from the new mood of protectionism in Washington, D.C., about how the U.S. seems to be turning its back on multilateralism and opting for a transactional kind of relationship with various trading partners. How would you see that as impacting India's economic prospects going forward?
Well, it's complex, right? So let's start first with why the U.S. is moving in this direction. Clearly, President Trump is not a fan of free trade. Since the 1980s, he has been pointing to, initially Japan, then China, as taking jobs away from the United States, taking wealth away from the United States. He and his close advisors on trade see a current account deficit with any country, a trade deficit with any country as an indictment of that country's trading practices and as evidence that they're exploiting the United States. Now, some of this may be rhetoric in order to try and get better deals, but I think underlying what the U.S. is doing is certainly, President Trump's conviction that this is for the good. And, he's not the only protectionist in the world. I think we have our own homegrown protectionists in India and elsewhere. And I think the key question is, the United States is the most powerful and one of the most richest countries in the world. And is he undermining the basis of U.S. prosperity and its dominance of the post-World War II economic system with this view? And certainly, I think we are sort of turning the tables on what worked. And a lot of Americans are hoping that whatever system we go to works better, because there's a lot of concern in the United States as elsewhere for good jobs. Okay, so with that context, let me add a couple of wrinkles in this. One is, apart from trying to level the playing field, which is supposedly unlevel as a result of the unfair practices of other countries, there is a strong desire to generate revenues from trade tariffs. As you know, the big, beautiful bill which passed recently is going to expand red ink in the U.S. fiscal deficit till the eye can see. And one of the offsets is the tariffs that the U.S. proposes to collect. Now, at the old level of tariffs, approximately an average of around 3%, you collected very little. Already, with average tariffs at around 13%, there's a substantial inflow of taxes on goods coming in. Of course, there's a big debate on who pays those taxes.
Right.
The president would say that the rest of the world pays those taxes, but most economists would say it's the Americans who are paying those taxes. Nevertheless, higher tariffs imply more revenues. Import tariffs imply more revenues for the U.S. government, which is helpful. The third element, which is very confusing, is that there's an attempt to shift the balance of trade from, China to other friendlier countries, maybe even bring it onshore into the U.S. And there's a lot of loose talk that the U.S. will get a lot of jobs when China stops exporting to the U.S. But most likely what will happen is it'll ship to another country which has similar sort of capabilities as China, relatively cheap labor, good infrastructure, logistics, etc. So that third element is very confusing because, initially when the president campaigned, it was 65% tariffs on the rest of the world, on China, and lower tariffs on the rest of the world. Right now, with the 34% tariffs on China and then 50% tariffs on Brazil, some talk that that the European Union would be 25. It's not clear there's a whole lot of distinction. Nevertheless, when you look at the deal with Vietnam, uh, again, it's we know the outlines of a deal. We don't know the details. It's supposed to be 20% tariffs on Vietnamese goods, but 40% tariffs on any transshipments of Chinese goods via Vietnam. So there seems to be a third element, which is to cut China down to size. But it's not very clearly expressed, and every so often the president makes concessions to China in an attempt to get them to the table. Right now, yesterday we saw NVIDIA being allowed to sell chips, AI chips to China, which they offer quality they weren't allowed, or there were restrictions on them before. So this is a moving target. We don't know where it goes. But put all together, I think higher tariffs by the United States towards the rest of the world are here to stay. They're not just a bargaining ploy, but they're partly a bargaining ploy to get tariffs down in other countries. And of course, because it is sometimes being negotiated by people who aren't expert in this, the president reserves the right to do the last negotiation. It doesn't always go in the way that technical experts would want them if they were focused primarily on improving the US's advantage.
Right. So as of now, it's not had an impact on prices. So there's no real public disquiet about tariffs. Is that?
Well, it's not had a huge impact, but when you parse the data carefully, you start seeing that in the areas that have been tariffed, there is faster growth in prices. So
right.
You would imagine, and you can see it in the data, that some exporters to the US would absorb some of the tariff increases initially until they're sure where it lands. I can't keep absorbing it, but at least initially, I don't want to change prices because I don't want to anger my customers. So, for example, the Japanese have been cutting prices on the cars they sell to the United States. But, this is not going to last because they have to make money also. So at some point, the tariffs will be passed through in a bigger way. But you can already see in the last CPI report, which came a few days back, that the tariffed sectors are showing higher price growth.
Right. So from India's point of view, the tariffs are supposed to be a kind of push towards negotiating a free trade agreement with the United States, a bilateral agreement. What are the risks and rewards that you see in this track of negotiations?
Well, let's be clear that India, adopted a policy of freer trade right from the liberalizations in the early 1990s. But we've been going back on that. And, to some extent, the old license permit Raj, where, the government decided which sectors you were free to enter, which we weren't, and where the tariffs were and where they weren't. It would be too much to say that that's back. But the intervention is back, whether it's through subsidies today or through, tariffs. And
production-linked incentives and so on. Is that what you're referencing? The production-linked incentives and so on?
Well, that's on the subsidy side, but on the tariffs...
Okay, you're talking about duties.
We put tariffs up on areas we want to encourage. But in putting up tariffs, we then put up tariffs on intermediate goods in that sector also. Then people complain, I can't make this effectively here because the intermediate goods are tariffs. And we go round and round on this.
Okay.
But that creates enormous uncertainty for business. What is going to be easy to do, easy to make? And where am I suddenly going to see a tariff put or a tariff taken away in order to, ease production for other entities in India? So I think that also, our big industrialists have a bad habit. When they see competition, they try and kill it through various forms of regulation. which sometimes a friendly government is willing to impose. And I think that all these are practices that inhibit competition and hurt the Indian consumer. I think in the best interests of both our producers and consumers, having a transparent and a level playing field where we invite foreign investors to produce in India, but give them the ability to compete with our producers on an even plane. I think that's in our interest. And therefore, to the extent that this negotiation with the US can clear up some of these issues and make our quote unquote industrial policy more credible and pro competition, I think it's in our own interest.
Right.
Of course, there are sensitive areas in trade, for example, our milk sector, etc., and we have to be careful there because you also want to look at the extent of subsidies in other countries and whether you're suddenly going to get a whole lot of subsidized imports into this country hurting our producers. So I think understanding where we can actually help ourselves by increasing competition, reducing tariffs, and where we owe some duty to our producers because they don't enjoy the same extent of subsidies or benefits. I think that's the task of the government.
Yeah. So because it's reported that one of the conditions that the US has specified is better market access in agricultural produce and dairy products. So that's obviously a red line for India. But what are the problems the Indian economy currently faces in your kind of estimation? Is there a problem of jobless growth? Is there a problem of informalization of employment, of too much dependence on low value manufacturing and services? And what is the way forward? You wrote in a recent book, co-authored with Rohit Lamba, that high value services might be the way forward for India. And how do you see that playing out? What kind of high value services, and how would you get the strategy onto that track in a credible fashion?
Sure. Let me just add one point which you ended with, the red lines. I think that one should look for win-win sort of situations in any negotiation. And it may be that there are some areas in agriculture where we can actually work with the United States to improve prospects for our own producers. For example, is there a way that they can help us market some of our products? We are the world's largest milk producer. Can we market some of our milk? Can they help value added in milk products? And so are there ways that we can engage them which don't say there's a red line in agriculture, but yeah, we want your help in agriculture, but these are the places where we really could benefit and you would benefit also, and we're willing to welcome foreign direct investment in these areas, and they would be good for our. So make the sort of argument that let's look for these ways, and we're happy to help where we can find these ways. On the broader issue of Indian growth, okay, let's start with the 2 or 3 obvious premises which we laid out in the book. One, we are in the midst of our population dividend. When our dependency ratio is falling, more and more young people are entering the labor force. The dependency ratio is the share of the very young, the babies, and the very old who can't work. That ratio is usually very high for a developing country because you have a lot of very, very young people when population is growing very fast. For India, as population growth is slowing, that dependency ratio is coming down, and we're getting more people of working age. That's the population dividend. Many countries have grown very fast when that population dividend is realized because more and more people working relative to those not working means a greater labor force and greater potential growth. For India, that's not happening. we've grown at 6.5% for the last, 25, 30 years, which is a hugely creditable performance, but we're not taking off. We're sort of in low Earth orbit. And really, to get rich before we get old, and we are growing older. You can see it in southern India, where fertility rates have fallen below reproduction rate. Women are having fewer children than would be suggested to keep the population sort of stable. I think the to become rich before we become old, pace of growth has to increase. We cannot be satisfied with 6.5. We are the fastest growing country in the G20, but we're also the poorest country in the G20 on a per capita basis. So you need to grow faster. The key question is, where's that growth going to come from? And that's the second aspect of this is manufacturing-led exports is much less of an answer today than it used to be for a number of reasons. One, manufacturing has become much more automated. And so today, even in places like assembly, where you think a lot of low-skilled workers can be used, you're seeing the use of a lot of machines. And what companies need is people who can tend the machines, repair the machines, rather than people who actually do the work that the machines do with their hands, soldering stuff onto motherboards and so on. So manufacturing is changing. Second, when you're competing in manufacturing, you're not competing with the United States or Europe, rich country workers, where your low cost of labor is really a big advantage. You're competing with Vietnam and China, who also have the low-cost labor, but also have good infrastructure, etc. So it's not that we cannot compete. We can. But that means a very, very rigorous eye to efficiency, etc., which we need to do more of. So that's number two. Third, and that's what we're seeing with what we started the program with, the protectionist wave in the US. But it's also, it's going to become protectionist in Europe. We're going to become, to some extent, when the flood of Chinese goods can't find a home in Europe and the US, we also going to be worried about what's coming into India. So across the world, there's manufacturing protectionism because everybody wants their own little manufacturing industry. They think it's necessary for national security, etc., which, by the way, is a debatable proposition. But bottom line, there's no room for another China. And we're China's size. We cannot expect the number of jobs in manufacturing. We can expect some. So our point is you need to think on a multi-level platform. One, for exports, and we do need exports, we're doing very well in high-skilled services. Today, we account for 4.5% of global exports. In manufacturing, we're more like 1.5%. So services have really been taking off, and especially in high skills. But that can't employ everyone. You cannot get the number of jobs you want from that. So we also need to think of certainly get all the jobs in manufacturing that we can, both to service the global economy, but also to service our domestic economy, which is growing and now is bigger than Japan. But we can also have a huge market for domestic services, which are more moderately skilled and not necessarily high skilled. As you know, we've been creating jobs and services. We can do far more of them, whether it is in truck driving or logistics, or whether it is in repair, or whether it is in carpentry, in plumbing. I mean, you're in, I presume, in Chennai. How easy is it to find a good plumber? I mean, I certainly found it very difficult when I was trying to look for somebody to repair what was going. We can create many, many more jobs, but for that, we need skill building. We need to train better plumbers. And that's not rocket science. So how do we do this multi-pronged? Train up the high-skilled in our IITs, but also start doing more innovation so that we can have more Indian products, because that's where the true value added is. NVIDIA makes a lot of money through its design and its patents. We have a lot of people who work for NVIDIA, but we don't have an NVIDIA ourselves. We need to do that. But at the lower end, we need to also train up a lot more workers to service the modern urban economy, but also our villages, our 5,000, 6,000 people. They can employ a lot of services themselves. And, we have a lot of agricultural possibilities, value added in agriculture, agri-industry. We have possibilities in manufacturing. We can certainly do the, low skill manufacturing to the extent possible. The southern states are attracting some of that. But we also can do moderate to high skill manufacturing, which we've been doing a lot of. So I think the point is get a job wherever, create a job wherever you can. But don't be focused on, this idea that only in export-led manufacturing are there jobs, because that train has left the station.
Pure vanity projects and more pragmatic decision making. But you say in your book that there's still some controversy over whether India is deindustrializing or not. But that question may be superfluous, since we should look at deindustrialization. This is an exact quote: deindustrialization not as a bug, but as a feature of our growth path. Now, looking back at last 3 decades, services have flourished and manufacturing has languished. Do you think that you can have high-value services growth without manufacturing value added? Is there because we have IT services exports as one, but very large volumes of IT imports, right? Telecom sector and in the information processing sector, very high volumes of hardware. So, in fact, our software industry is so exclusively export focused that it has very little skill or time to spare for the domestic market. So that kind of an imbalance, both between manufacturing and services and between the external focus and the domestic focus, does that call for some form of correction?
So first, we shouldn't see the imports of IT hardware as necessarily a problem. Yes, it's an opportunity for us to produce our own hardware, but not by sort of saying thou shalt buy only Indian, in which case you handicap the IT software industry. Remember, there was some moves to improve laptop production in India, and we put, there was some talk of imposing tariffs on the imports of laptops or, other forms of IT hardware. I don't think you want to do that. What certainly you hope is that with the large quantities that they buy here, there is an Indian producer who has the capabilities. By all means, that when they're equally capable, we should choose Indian, but not sort of impose a tax on the software exporters by increasing protection to hardware. Okay. I think as far as the Indian domestic use of software goes, for example, I think Indians will find more need for that. The problem is demand, not that the IT exporters are unwilling to supply. I was talking to somebody who does healthcare in the US, and he says Indian hospitals simply don't want this. They don't want to pay for it, and they are not convinced that this is going to add to efficiency. Now, the bigger ones are coming around to it, but the smaller ones need to see this as part of their functioning, that they need access to patient data, be able to transmit it, this, that, be able to, copy surgeon notes very quickly onto it. All the kind of stuff that our Indian sort of software firms are doing for the rest of the world. So they have to become more reliable purchasers of that. And I have no doubt that the need is coming very soon, and that our software exporters will shift direction. But I do think that with our large domestic economy, if we can sort of create the urge to be competitive, there will be Indian producers who will rival the rest of the world. The hunger amongst our youth is there. But right now, if you look at Indian production, take, for example, the auto sector, we have a couple of EVs in place, but we've largely missed the entire movement towards batteries, towards, a state-of-the-art EV technology, while China has captured that. Why? We need to ask ourselves these questions. Last point. You say maybe we need the hardware in order to do software. Not clear. NVIDIA doesn't produce any chips, but it designs them. Apple doesn't produce any iPhones, but it designs them. And in designing, you capture the higher end of the market. In designing and in the IP, the intellectual property, you capture the higher end of the market. The best chip making machines in the world are produced in Netherlands, which neither designs the chips nor produces them, but it makes the chip making machine. So this canard, which is floated sometimes, that, oh, you need the manufacturing in order to do the associated services, is not necessarily true. I'm not going to say this as a theorem. I'm sure there are some places where it's beneficial to have the manufacturing and the services, but in many areas it's not. And in a global world where communication is so easy, you can figure out what the manufacturers want very quickly, and you can do the design part or some other part depending on where you think your advantage lies.
So is this transition going to be affected through kind of impersonal market forces, or do you need some kind of strategic investment, or do you just need to get the prices right, as the World Bank often says, just get the incentives right, and the miracle will follow? How do you see that transition coming about?
Well, you need action on a number of fronts. Okay.
You wouldn't say that strategic investment is one of them? Would you say that there is a...
I would strategic investment in capabilities, not in the government saying thou shalt invest in this sector or that. I don't think we have the capacity in our bureaucracy. We've never had the capacity to really say this is where you should invest or that is where you should invest. That said, I think, for example, if we want to, use our R&D funds in an intelligent way, it's not a bad idea to try and say, okay, where is the world heading? Where do we have some advantages? Can we sort of identify a few thrust areas, for example, where we will fund R&D, both by universities but also by business, and combinations of the two, because intellectual property is really important. So I think I'm not averse to choosing a few thrust areas because you can't do everything. But I think we should focus on improving capabilities, strengthen the quality of our schools, our universities, find, again, you can't spread the money so widely it makes no difference. You have to have a few national labs where you've got state-of-the-art equipment where you can actually be competitive in a number of areas. You could put those national labs in private universities and public universities, but you can't have every university with a state-of-the-art lab. But you see, I think upskilling sort of movement, both across the board, not just at the very top, not just at the very elite universities, but also lower down, as we talked earlier, carpentry, plowing, etc. And a number of states are looking at this. As you know, Tamil Nadu has this non-Mudalvan scheme, but we should find out what works, because there's a lot of skilling schemes which go nowhere. But figure out what works and sort of replicate that manyfold across India. So that's one place where creating the infrastructure, the human capital infrastructure, is important. Of course, the government has been focused on creating the physical capital infrastructure, roads, airports, etc. And that's a good thing. We have to be careful not to overbuild. There's a temptation sometimes when you build, every small town wants a metro. That's overbuilding, and those will be white elephants down the line. We have to be a little careful about that even today. But I think that building out the infrastructure is the second aspect of what the government can do, including cheap green power. We can't afford very dirty power for too long. So moving green, cheaper power available widely would be an enormous resource for our industry. But I think that I would focus more on creating the frameworks I think another aspect of that is making industry more certain about what's coming. That is not constantly changing the rules, etc., but also offering a broad vision, which has more details than we want to be developed by 2047. But, here are some of the things you can expect from government. But I think broadly, government's role is to create the support systems and the infrastructure that can allow business to take advantage. I think we have established that the private sector is reasonably capable. We don't have to occupy the commanding heights of the economy as in Nehruvian times. But at the same time, the private sector needs more competition. Too many of our large businesses throttle competition in their industries. We have to be more alert to creating the competitive framework, some of which can be done by bringing in foreign direct investment. The Chinese used foreign direct investment very effectively by improving the sort of technology transfers within that industry, within the country, but also giving a competitive boost. If you have to compete with Tesla on EVs, you very quickly learn to get to the frontier. So I think having big players domestically from outside also, in some moderation, can be very useful to increasing competition and pushing our big firms to do better.
Right. So just a brief detour to the global scenario and then back to India, because you wrote the book Fault Lines in 2010 and published in 2010. And this was in the context of the global meltdown of 2008. You identified three factors that contributed to that outcome, which was disastrous for both rich and poor nations. And these were widening trade imbalances, sharpening economic inequality in the United States, and financial deregulation that was inconsistent standards between different countries of financial regulation. So, have those conditions changed for the better in any way since in the last 15 years?
Not really. I would say on financial regulation, we have a better handle on the banks. But
that have not changed.
What's that?
The other two have not changed. The economic inequality and the trade.
I think, have anything gotten worse? Because the public's attitude towards trade has become much more sort of negative. Trade is exploitative rather than beneficial. So that's one problem. And the perception of inequality, if not the reality, has also increased. That, some people, the elite, are benefiting while the rest of us languish based on elite policies, such as free trade or elite policies on, constraining access to higher education and so on. The problem, however, is the corrective, the corrective is much harder, which is really improving access, expanding access to the broader masses, to all the possibilities in life. Instead, the approach seems to be let's sort of punish the bad guys here, which for trade means every foreigner, and for inequality means let's punish the universities, as opposed to let there be a leveling up. We're sort of leveling down, which means that I think it was Surjit Palla who coined this term. We all become povertarians. We revel in poverty. Unfortunately, global economics is moving in that direction. I think even on regulation, unfortunately, what happens is when we have moved far away enough from a crisis, we stop paying attention to potential risks. And just like in India, in the rest of the world, even if banks aren't taking the risk directly, they're taking risks indirectly. So for a lot of private credit right now, banks are engaged in sort of providing lines of credit, etc., to the private credit issuers. And so banks are they're also lending sometimes to the private credit. So they come in through the back door. It's very true of India also that historically, NBFCs are not completely independent. They get their fair amount of their financing from the banks. And so when we say the NBFCs are taking the risk, the banks aren't, we sort of ignore the fact that it's coming back through the back door onto banks.
Yeah, it's all connected. Yeah, right. So are there any concerns about financial stability in India, particularly? I mean, there has been in recent times RBI more and more funding the government budget deficit through its surpluses, which would, in an ideal situation, be retained for situations of instability. But now, are we sufficiently equipped for a state of potential instability in the financial system?
Right. I mean, the RBI's equity, which comes from the fact that the RBI holds a lot of foreign currency reserves, which when the rupee depreciates are higher in rupee terms. And because the liabilities the RBI issues are all rupee liabilities, both the money as well as the reserves that the banks hold, what happens is when the rupee depreciates, the RBI becomes wealthier because of the holding of foreign exchange reserves. And so the government naturally sees the wealth of the RBI as something that belongs to the people. And for a long time has been pressurizing the RBI to pay out more of that in dividends. Now, I think the problem with paying it out in dividends is what you just raised. That is, that if there's a huge dividend payout, it sort of changes the fiscal balance for that year. And presumably at some point, with the fact that we have now low inflation, the rupee is going to stop depreciating so much. And the RBI is not going to have this easy source of wealth to pay out to the government. So, I mean, in my view, at some point, if the RBI's equity is really much bigger than what you think is reasonable, there should be an arrangement with the government where the government sort of basically, writes down some of its, recognizes the RBI equity as an asset and maybe offsets some of the debt and says its net debt is lower, rather than having it sort of come out as a flow and change the, financing and spending in that year. That to me would be the least disruptive way of dealing with the RBI's sort of equity holding. But of course, governments prefer a dividend to some accounting entry where they say, oh, we have all these assets against the RBI and we have this debt, so our net debt is lower by 5 or 10% of GDP. So that's the political economy of the issue. I don't think, other than that, the RBI is necessarily financing the government. But I think, from a financial risk perspective, I think we always have to be vigilant. Where are the risks emerging? I think the recent episode with Jane Street and SEBI, I think is quite important because, arguably, and I think the details have to come out, but, some of these hedge funds have made tens of billions of dollars by taking the other side to some of our, youth who are speculating in options markets. We really need to be more careful about allowing sort of low-income or moderate-income youth into markets where it becomes more like a lottery or, gambling rather than real investing. And if these markets become really big, we need to ask who's actually taking part. Maybe even a requirement that you have to have a certain level of sophistication and a certain level of wealth to participate in these markets makes sense. On the flip side, to keep the markets honest, we have to act very severely against any evidence of market manipulation, The SEBI document, which is quite detailed, and I commend the SEBI on doing what it did. Now will be challenged in court. We'll see how that plays out. But accusations of market manipulation are very serious, and we should take action if it turns out to be supported by the courts.
Yeah, final question. I think we're a little over time, but it's an important question because you do pay a lot of attention to governance and administrative processes in several of your writings, and you have advocated that decentralized administrative processes would be best suited for the challenges that India faces. And earlier in your book titled "The Third Pillar," you'd spoken about how the community gets very little attention as a pillar of economic stability and growth compared to the state and the market. So do you see this principle as applicable in India, or is it exclusive to Western countries with very well-knit civil societies? I mean, in India, it's not quite that harmonious down at the grassroots. So how would that principle play out in the Indian context?
I think it's extremely important, and I think the time has come where we should do more of it. It doesn't, as you recall, there was big debates between Ambedkar and Gandhi about decentralization.
Yeah.
The village was the den of inequity, local elites kept out, lower castes, and it was terrible. Gandhi's sense was self-governance should be pushed down to the village level, and they would learn. And I think over time, certainly both of our leaders have some merit to their arguments. But it is possible now, given the social development we've had, to decentralize more and to keep. It doesn't mean that you decentralize to the village and just let go. I think keeping the democratic processes running in the village are important. But empowerment is also very important. And the village community can see when the funds transmitted from the state government or the central government are misspent or line the pockets of the village elite. And so long as you preserve some element of democratic response there, then they feel they have control. If the panchayat leader can be thrown out, if the panchayat head can be thrown out for not distributing the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana funds properly, or for not ensuring the school teacher shows up on time in the village school. Today, they have no ability to rectify those because a lot of these decisions are taken far further away at the district headquarters or at the state headquarters, or even in the Delhi in the national capital. So I think Ambedkar was against decentralization, but now the time has come for much more decentralization. We started with the Panchayat Raj constitutional amendments, but it really has stopped at the state level. We haven't allowed decentralization to go forth into the district, municipality, village level because the state doesn't want to give up power. And I think the southern states have been better at this, but state after state, they should give more power to the municipalities, to the villages. That will both enhance the commitment to democracy, but also allow for better governance. And I think if we can do that, that is a revolution which will, help us in the years to come.
Would you have something to say about the problem of accessing authentic data, the survey system, which has been India's kind of unique achievement in many ways? Over the last 50 years, they built up a very robust system of national accounts and also of sample survey of consumption, poverty, and so on. Is there a reason to believe that this government is in some way engaged in a war against data to ensure that there is no comparability with earlier data, and that they are somehow sticking to puff up their own achievements by ensuring that there's no comparable kind of data anywhere. You just start de novo from 2014 and
Yeah, I don't know that there is a war against data, but yes, the suppression of certain surveys which send a message that the government doesn't necessarily like, and the constant changing and fiddling of the underlying sort of parameters and the ways we conduct the surveys. I do think that as a country which is modernizing very, very fast, we need all the data that we can get, but we also need data to understand what is working amongst government programs and what is not. There is an accusation of fire and forget with government campaigns. We announce a campaign, but never actually determine whether it's working. And there's it becomes an announcement rather than a effective rollout. Now there are, to be frank, there are some places which the government, both national and state, have done a wonderful job expanding infrastructure, for example. But there are other places where they haven't done so good a job. Skilling is one example. Can we get better data on finding out what works, which will help, both national and state governments then sort of look for best practices? So, almost surely every government program should have attached to it an evaluation process by which the data that is generated are collected and then the government program evaluated. And it's not a bad thing. If you start a program, it doesn't work, close it down or change it. But don't sort of say that you're infallible and everything you do, must work and that nobody should challenge it. So, I think the government doesn't understand that suppressing data is to its own detriment. When you don't know how the PLI scheme works, it's terrible. Yes, you can crow from the rooftops, but nobody is going to believe you. And you also make bad decisions. So you need data, but also give it to your critics. Your critics are sometimes your best friends because they will identify what's going wrong and then you can make the changes and then get credit for it. If you're in power for a long time, it's to your benefit to offer the best governance you can. And so I'm all with you. We need to improve the data, and that should be a constant effort. And every program should come with a data, with an evaluation scheme also.
Something like the argument made for press freedom, which you can deal with in your recent book on the way the press is being kind of manipulated to ensure that only the good news, the positive signals go out. It doesn't really help in the process of governance. It just, it doesn't give you a sense of where things are going right or where things are going wrong, right? So that's that.
It doesn't. But I mean, the problem is the big lie tends to pervade in societies which dominate the press, right? They can send a narrative and a lot of people don't question that narrative. Eventually, when they see the day-to-day life is very different from the narrative that is being portrayed, they turn, but it takes a long time. So you can see the attraction of trying to dominate the press and sending only feel-good news out. Eventually, for sure, it hurts your ability to govern, and that's every day. But for the public to understand that this is really, mass manipulation takes a long time. And that's where the attraction of this process is. And that's where we as Indians should fight it.
Right. Thanks so much, Professor Rajan. Thanks so much for sparing a whole hour of your time. It's been more of a time to it than we bargained for, but great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Good luck. Thanks. Bye.